Got
All
it.
right,
Yeah.
welcome to Michael's Record Collection. I am happy today to be joined by Neil Poole from the Def Lep Pod. Neil, thanks for your time today.
Thanks very much, Michael, for inviting me on. Very much appreciated when other podcasters invite me on to their podcast. It's always really nice. So thank you very much. Lovely to have the invite.
Where are you in the world right now?
So right now I am in my daughter's bedroom in Liverpool in the UK, hence why I've got pink curtains behind me. Obviously, Michael, I'd normally have a much more masculine background when doing podcasting, but no, today, daughter's bedroom, Liverpool, which is northwest of the UK.
Hmm.
It's where the Beatles are from. That's probably what it's best known for.
Yeah, yeah. I expected Def Leppard tapestries behind you, maybe some posters, but no, this will do just fine. I wanted to ask you about the Def Lep Pod. This is a podcast dedicated to the music of Def Leppard, as the title would indicate. How long? You haven't been doing this very long.
No, I've not been doing the Def Leppard podcast for very long. I started it last June. And the reason it was started was essentially because I've always wanted it to be a Def Leppard podcast. And I was always looking for Def Leppard podcasts. And you can get rock music podcasts where they might do an episode on Def Leppard, and that's great. But there was never anything to sort of scratch that itch. So I know it's a bit of an old cliche. So I thought, well, if no one else is doing it, I'll do one myself. Funnily enough, within weeks of me actually recording my first one and putting it out, I did actually find that there was another Def Leppard podcast that did 2 episodes and they haven't done it since. It was really good, actually. It was called Undefeated. And in a way, I'm hoping they come back on and share the weight of doing Def Leppard podcasts. You never have too many. So essentially, I love podcasts and obviously I love Def Leppard. That's what I was looking for to listen to, and there was nothing out there. So
Mhm.
I decided to make one myself. And yeah, that was about 18 months ago, coming up to now.
Tell me about your Def Leppard origin story. How did you come upon the band? How did you become a fan? What is the depth of your Def Leppard fandom?
Yeah, so in 1988, I was 10 and my brother was 3 years older than me. He was 13 and he got into Iron Maiden. So, you know, the way you often can get into music through a older sibling, like the older brother and his record collection. And it was very much a case of I saw he was into Iron Maiden. I thought, oh, that's good. I might get into Iron Maiden as well. And then he suggested to me that I should get my own band. um, and then he said, well, there's a band out there called Def Leppard. I think they're quite good. Why don't you get into them? So, never having heard Def Leppard, I went to a local shop called Woolworths that doesn't exist anymore, where you could buy singles. And they happened to have a single out at the time. And it wasn't a big rock single. It was Love Bites, which is a big ballad, got to number 1 in America. So I purchased that without hearing it on 12-inch. I've still got it to this day. And I really liked it. And also the good thing about that single was it had 2 B-sides on it. One was Billy's Got a Gun live off the Pyromania album, which I know we're going to discuss a little bit later on. And then also there was another song off the Hysteria album called Excitable, which is like a dance track. So
Mhm.
within this 12-inch record, there were 3 very, very different sounding songs. And then on the back of that, I then bought a pirate copy for £2 off a man who used to come around the houses and sell pirate copies on cassette of albums. And I bought Hysteria and then listened to it non-stop for essentially about a year. And then it was from that point that I then delved backwards into it. So interesting. I got into a lot of other bands around that time as well, but they never stuck. But the one that actually stuck, so it was just sheer luck, to be honest. I just bought a record of a band I'd never heard based on my brother saying, why don't you find a band? And, you know, whatever it is, 30 years later or so, I'm still here.
Yeah. Get your own, he says. Get your own band. So you kind of answered this question. You went from Hysteria was your entry point. You went backwards first and then came forward with the band.
Yeah, that's exactly it. So, as you know, there's often for different reasons, there's been big gaps between Def Leppard albums. So obviously between Pyromania and Hysteria, there's a 4-year gap because the drummer Rick Allen loses his arm.
Hmm.
And between Hysteria and Adrenalize, you've got 1987 and 1992. There was a big gap between them two because obviously Hysteria World Tour lasts for 2 years, and then Steve Clark, who was the guitarist, died. So there was another tragedy that delayed it. So because of that, although I discovered them in 1988, there was then a 2 or 3 year gap before the next album came out, Adrenalize. So I actually had that time then to go backwards and discover all of the other albums. So it was Hysteria that obviously I discovered first. And then from that, and particularly from Loving Billy's Got a Gun, which to this day is one of my favourite Def Leppard songs, I literally went in reverse order backwards. So I got Pyromania, loved that. Then I got High and Dry, loved that. And then got On Through the Night and loved that. So I actually had like a couple of years between Hysteria and Adrenalize coming out to actually discover the 4 previous albums. I was really surprised to see how different they were. So if you take those 4 albums, I mean, each one doesn't sound very much like the one that came before it. So it was quite an interesting period of discovery for me, going backwards in the band and hearing them getting heavier and heavier and heavier. So obviously I've got into that quite commercial, polished, Mutt Lange produced sound. But even though I've gone back, and obviously at this time I'm not only listening to Def Leppard, I'm listening to, I'm discovering Led Zeppelin and Black Sabbath and Neil Young and Iron Maiden and all of these bands as well. So I had no problem with it getting heavier. And so in fact, I quite liked it. And I'm listening to High and Dry and thinking, oh, this sounds a lot like that AC/DC album, Highways of Hell. And there's obvious reasons why with the same producer. So yeah, it was a good year, a couple of years to sort of discover all of that previous stuff as well.
Yeah, I had a similar path, but one album earlier, I came in through the Photograph video, really, on MTV. Def Leppard was not really well known in the United States, and then we got MTV. I think our house got it in, I think, 83, I want to say. We started seeing this guy on our TV that's wearing the British flag as a shirt, and another guy's a drummer and he's wearing it as his shorts, and they've got, women in cages, and they got Marilyn Monroe being strangled and all this stuff, and it's just a very a strange video, but at least it wasn't one of those ones where the band was acting it out. But it was one of the first, I think, sort of story videos that we saw on MTV, and just based on the strength of that song, I started enjoying that. And then you'd start to every once in a while see a video from one of the High and Dry songs. And so I started with Pyromania, went back to High and Dry, went back to On Through the Night, and kind of like you, I just like, wow, this is good stuff. And we're going to be talking, as you mentioned, about Pyromania a little bit later in the show. But I wanted to find out sort of, for you in England, Def Leppard, I'm not sure how they're viewed, because it seems like when I looked back at the charts, it seemed like Def Leppard did much better in the US than in their native England.
Yeah, there's 2 very different stories for Def Leppard, whether you're looking at it from a UK perspective or whether you're looking at it from perspective of the States, and there's 2 very different trajectories. The overall common theme, however, is that they've always been much, much bigger in the United States than they have in the UK. So essentially, they break in the States with the Photograph video that you saw. That's what really breaks them. The US audience has been primed a little bit just before that, because obviously it's a couple of years before that MTV starts up, and because they've only got a few videos. There's a Def Leppard video for Bringing On the Heartbreak, which is just a live video. Now, that was actually recorded in a theatre called the Royal Court Theatre in Liverpool, where I'm from. Okay. So I like that little link. It's well before my time. So that used to get played on quite heavy rotation. And when that came onto MTV, the High and Dry album had really stalled and stopped selling. But once the High and Dry video came out, then obviously that reinvigorated that album, and then High and Dry started selling quite a lot more. And then the US audience is then primed then when Photograph comes out, and that really explodes onto MTV. And what's really interesting, to give you a comparison between the success in the UK and the success of in the States of Pyromania is on the first gig of the Pyromania tour. Def Leppard playing a really little club in London called the Marquee Club, which is quite famous. But it's like, it's a few hundred people. By the time they finish that tour in the States, they're playing in a stadium. I think it's called the Murphy Stadium, and there's 55,000 people there. And it goes on to sell like over 6 million records at the time in the States. But it's only really in 1987 that they break in Britain with the release of Animal. And Animal gets to number 6. Def Leppard have got a bit of a bad relationship with the British music press in the early 80s. That doesn't really do them any help. But I mean, that's the British music press. The British music press have got, through the years, there's loads of bands they really hated. They hated Led Zeppelin. They hated Queen. They didn't like Def Leppard. There's a definite certain type of band. I think any band that they think are particularly showy or flash, they tend not to like. But I think with Rick losing his arm on New Year's Eve 1984, and then they play, I think there's a bit of the sentiment softens towards Def Leppard, and then by the time Hysteria is released, I think they're welcomed with a lot more open arms, and then they have a really successful period then. So that really stays to this day. They still play arenas and what have you in Britain.
Yeah. So one thing that I like about your podcast is that you have a tremendous gift for wordplay. I think that it's fun just to listen to the way that you intro the show, the way you kind of weave a narrative about what your subject is. And I'm interested to know, do you script out everything ahead of time? Do you read from a script? Do you practice it, or do you just go in cold and this with a basic outline?
No, I can't go in cold. I tried that. So, for example, on this podcast now, you'll hear me going and things like that a lot more. So there's a reason why when I do Def Lep Pod, I can't just come in cold and just have this free flow of perfectly articulate conversation, which some podcasters are really, really good at. So what I tend to do, though, because it's 3/4 scripted, so it's bullet point scripted, but quite detailed bullet points, but it's not word for word scripted, but about 3/4. And then the other thing that I try to do with it is so it doesn't sound too scripted, because I think when something sounds too scripted, it can create a bit of a sort of a wall between you and the listener. So I try my best to break that down. So what I will do is that the bullet points that I write, I will just write them off the top of my head, and what goes down in those bullet points are the basis of what I say. I won't like draft and then redraft it and refine it or whatever. So what I say, although it's bullet point scripted, it's still what just came out of my head, as if I was speaking and able to articulate myself without going and having lots of delays.
Okay, fair enough. So I just enjoy the way that you sort of outline things. How much research do you do for there I go with let's say just a typical song, like you're going to feature a song, like you're going to do Hit and Run or something. How long do you think you spend just researching that topic?
I will tend to know about 70 to 80% of what I say. That gives me a good starting point, where if I think of a song, I'll straight away think, well, I know there's this and this and this to say about it. I know that there's these other versions. I know that it might be related to that song in this way and whatever. So I'll know a lot of it myself. And then essentially what I'll do is I will just sit down and then I will dig through old magazines I've got on the internet and, use things like Setlist FM, just to sort of see when the song was first played or whatever, that type of thing. And then normally I will come across things that I didn't know. And then I'll have a whole lot of facts and things that I know about the song. And then once I've got all of those facts and things about the song, and that, by the way, that could be, I dread to think what it is. I've actually added it up over time. I'll sort of give myself a couple of weeks to just be thinking about it and mulling it over and finding things and finding little YouTube clips and finding little interviews and finding little clips of songs. So if I added all that time up, it's probably about, I don't know, probably about 8, 9, 10 hours, I think, about that. But yeah, I try not to think about it because I probably stopped doing it if I actually added up the time.
Yeah, so you've got I mean you've got a family, so they have to see you sometimes, right?
Yeah. But they quite like me doing it. They know how much I like Def Leppard and everything. So they see it makes me happy. It keeps me out of trouble, keeps me off the
Yeah.
streets, Michael. So
I'm familiar with that kind of family understanding, let's say. um, One of the things that I think is interesting is you come up with, like, sometimes it's like an isolated guitar part or an isolated vocal, and I just wonder, is that stuff that you find through YouTube digging or Reddit, or do people send you stuff? How do you come up with that stuff?
I just find that stuff on YouTube.
Yeah.
It's as simple as that. I know there's other podcasts out there. So there's a really good Iron Maiden podcast called Talking Maiden, which I mean I think they did a couple of 100 episodes and they've stopped now, but that's really good. But I know that the fellas who did that, and one of them in particular, where they have isolated guitar tracks and isolated vocals, I think they actually do that themselves. They actually have the know-how how to do that. I don't. And essentially, where I can do the very idea of doing that is I rip that off them, essentially. So, I mean, I listen to a lot of podcasts and, you hear ideas and you sort of, you take them, which I think is fine. But you just put your own little spin on it. But no, I'm not able to do that myself. I don't have the technical expertise or access to the original tracks. But there's obviously people out there who do, and they put these things on YouTube. There's not that much stuff for Def Leppard, to be honest. There's some good stuff out there for Photograph. There's some good stuff out there for Love Bites, but there isn't loads. But if you look for the same thing for Iron Maiden, there's hours and hours of isolated tracks.
Yeah. So before we get into our Pyromania discussion, while we've got people's attention, I want you to tell people where they can find you, where they can find Def Lep Pod, and we'll tell them again at the end, but why don't we tell them now?
Yeah, thank you. So yeah, Def Lep Pod you can find on any app that you use podcasts. So you just go into them and you type in Def Lep Pod, you will find it. My host site that I use is Podbean, which I think is the same as you, Michael.
Yes, it is.
So not that many people listen through Podbean. It tends to be Apple. I get a lot of people listening through Amazon Music for some reason. That's just started all of a sudden. So essentially, if you search Def Lep Pod, you'll find it. And then I'm on Twitter. I am as at Def Lep Pod. I used to be on Facebook as Def Lep Pod, but my account got closed down because I think it looked too close to the actual Def Leppard. It looked like I was trying to be Def Leppard, even though I clearly wasn't. So I'm now on Facebook as Def Lep Pod Neil, and then there's just a picture of me with my t-shirt on that says Def Lep Pod. So as I said, I'm not an expert in all of the socials and the technical stuff. It's all a little bit amateurish, but yeah, if you search Def Lep Pod, you'll find it these days.
How many times have you seen Def Leppard live?
Ooh. Well, it must be quite a lot because I don't know. I couldn't count it. So I've seen them on every tour since Adrenalize, and I've probably seen them twice on most of those tours. And then there's been the odd other gig that they've done. If I was going to hazard a guess, it's probably about 15 times, something like that. So not loads and loads and loads. I'm not one of these people who follows a band around everywhere. That's just their finances permitting. But I must say, and I don't know about you, Michael, but with the coronavirus and the pandemic and everything, I'm very much of the mindset that when bands start playing again properly and we're free to go out there and see all of these gigs, now if Def Leppard played again, it's like you realise how you take it for granted, and I'll probably go and try and see them in every gig on the British tour now. So I don't know if you feel like that as well, but like, other bands you like.
Yeah, I mean it's a little harder for us to follow bands around here. This country's a little big, but I know what you mean, because when we open back up for concerts, I have already seen several, and I've got more on the docket. I'm very interested in seeing as many shows as I can, because after about almost 2 years of not being able to see anybody, it's now I just want to see everyone as often as I can. So it's been it's been an expensive layout for tickets and t-shirts and whatnot, but it's worth it. It's fun. And yeah, my big regret is that I don't have one band that I'm just so into. I just can't do it. It's just, to me, I mean, you could see behind me is part of my
Yeah.
collection, and if I did that for every band I liked, I wouldn't have any place to live. I think so.
Who are you going to see next?
The next one I have purchased tickets for is I'm going to see Genesis in December,
Okay.
and so but I'm kicking the tires on perhaps going to some shows between now and then. So we'll have to see how it goes. But
I know those shows have been going down really well. They've been getting really well reviews. Obviously, Phil Collins is not in great shape at the moment,
yeah,
but apparently vocally he's still delivering, and I've heard that that's all really good. So yeah, excellent,
yeah,
good stuff.
yeah. So I will tell you I have a weird Def Leppard story before we get into the Pyromania thing. I was working in I used to be in sports, and I used to be I still do public relations work, but I was working specifically for a hockey team in South Florida in the early 2000s, and I was contacted by somebody who said they liked my feature stories and they had a potential job for me if I was interested. And what they were supposedly was a friend of the girlfriend of Steve Clark. And the
Okay.
girlfriend of Steve Clark supposedly wanted to tell Steve's story of his final day on Earth, his final hours, and sort of the story that led up to it and everything. And so I was like, yeah, I'm interested in that. I talked to this guy on the phone. We exchanged a bunch of emails, and he said, she's really shy. She's really not sure she wants to do it, but she knows that she wants the story out there and all this stuff. And so I was like, okay, well, I'd have to interview her. Obviously, we'd have to meet and talk and have some preliminary discussions, write an outline and all this stuff. I'd never written a full length book before, but I was all set to do it. And then it just started to get really squirrely, and I wasn't hearing back. And so I don't know if I was being catfished or what, but it was a very specifically Def Leppard catfishing, and it was very strange, and it came out of nowhere. I mean, but I was thinking, yeah, this would be an interesting story to tell.
You're right. That is a strange Def Leppard story.
Yeah.
That's possible. I talk a lot with people about Def Leppard, and that's probably the strangest one that I've heard. I'm glad you never got catfished, though.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. Maybe she just got cold feet, or maybe she never existed. I have no way of knowing, but I was definitely interested in writing that story, but it just never came to pass.
Oh, that's a shame.
So let's talk about Pyromania. This is I think, if hold my feet to the fire, this is my favorite Def Leppard album. It's the bridge between the harder edged, harder rocking Def Leppard and the more polished, higher sheen hysteria that sort of the band morphed into. And I think for me, High and Dry and Pyromania are my two favorites because of the fact that they still have a little grit to them.
Mm.
Not that the other albums after that haven't been fantastic, but I kind of could see where some people come from when they talk about it. Oh, I don't really like bands like Boston because they just sound a little too clean and too polished, because I feel like Def Leppard kind of moved into that area. They didn't quite lose me, but I certainly like the little rougher around the edges version of the band a little more. But this album came out in 1983. It was the third studio album between High and Dry and Hysteria, and it was recorded from January to November 1982 at Parkgate Studios and Battery Studios, and that's a pretty long time to work on an album.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, first thing I would say though is the view that you've just given, and that's a view that I've heard a lot. I think anyone who discovered Def Leppard, you always have a fondness for the point at which you discover a band. Anyway,
Yeah.
there's a general sort of, it can be like a bias towards that. But I know particularly people who got into Def Leppard on the High and Dry album or the Pyromania album, they to this day are still their favorite Def Leppard albums. For me, Pyromania would be second. So even though I go back and discover that afterwards. I it's an album that I still really love. But yeah, in terms of the length of time, well, I think High and Dry took 2 months, and at the time that was considered a long time to create an album, because I think late 70s, early 80s, there's still very much in rock music, and that's fine, because there's lots of different ways to skin a cat. As such, is that it's about catching the live essence of the band and catching that rawness on record. I think Def Leppard always looked at it in a different way, in which they saw the live arena and they saw the recorded arena as such as two very different things, in which you could do and show two very different sides of the band. So you see Def Leppard, they still can be quite raw live, especially on some of those early songs. But obviously, Pyromania is the one where, well, it's funny with Def Leppard, the same story, it tends to repeat itself multiple times. So they go into High and Dry and they want to spend longer on the production and try and push the boundaries of what they've done previously. Then they do the same thing on Pyromania, but to a more extreme degree. And then they do the same again on Hysteria to a more extreme degree. And then obviously, on your personal taste, you draw the line of maybe where they pushed it too far or didn't push it far enough. And that's where the timeliness of Pyromania comes in, where it takes, up to nearly a year, is because they're now spending so much time on, the production and trying to get things perfect and what have you. And I think there's a bit of a myth. It's not a myth because it's true, but they don't do it on every song. But there's a view that on all Def Leppard albums that they record each of the strings on a guitar separately. You'll see that everywhere, and that doesn't happen. It happens on one small part of the song Hysteria, but the first place that it does happen, where for one part of a song they did actually record all of the single strings in a chord separately and then put them together so it sounds like the one chord, was actually on the chorus to Billy's Got a Gun, because they couldn't get like a deep bass, sort of fat enough sound. So Mutt Lange decided to do it that way. So if you think about that, if they're recording parts of a song string at a time on a guitar, then all of a sudden, 8, 9, 10, 11 months or whatever to record an album starts making more sense why that might actually happen.
Yeah, exactly. But they used to make albums in a couple of days, and then now we're taking years here at this point. It was released on January 20th, 1983 on Vertigo in the UK and Europe, and on Mercury in the US, produced, as you mentioned, by Robert John Mutt Lange. Joe Elliott on lead vocals, Steve Clark lead and rhythm guitars. Phil Collins' first album with Leppard, his guitar solos on tracks 1 through 3, 6, and 7, and additional rhythm guitars. Rick Savage on bass, Rick Allen on drums, and Pete Willis, his last gasp with the band, rhythm guitars. He had some of the stuff recorded before he was fired.
Yeah, and not only is he on the record, if you actually look at the song credits, he's actually he's actually credited for writing quite a few of those songs. So it is a strange album where you've actually got 3 different guitarists on there. And I think with the loss of Pete Willis, you lose some things losing Pete Willis, you gain some things getting Phil Collins. I think Pete Willis's musical tastes were at the heavier end than the rest of the band, so his favourite band was Judas Priest. So obviously, if he's included in songwriting, then he's going to bring some of that heavier element in the same way that Steve Clark did. Like his hero was Jimmy Page. So a lot of those earlier albums, the heavier side of it will come from Pete Willis and Steve Clark. So you still get that in Pyromania. There are some songs in there that are still quite heavy or quite very guitar based, so like Die Hard the Hunter, but he's got a gun and what have you. What you get with Phil Collins is you probably get technically a better guitarist. So some of the guitar solos on Pyromania, so things, for example, Rock of Ages, Stage Fright, Photograph, they're all Phil Collins. I mean, they're effectively his auditions to get into the band, is playing those solos. I think Stage Fright he got in like the first take, and that was essentially his audition. So you get really good solos from Phil Collins, and then also what you get is when Phil Collins came in, they realized how well he could sing. So he's added to a lot of the backing vocals. So the melodies and the harmonies are all of a sudden enhanced in Pyromania from the introduction of Phil Collins. So it's quite an interesting album in terms of you've got the influence of Pete Willis and some of the heaviness and the guitars in there, but you've got some of the things that Phil Collins brings as well. So you've definitely got the influence of 3 different guitarists as well as the rest of the band and the songwriting there. So it's a really interesting album, and I think it benefits from all of those influences.
Yeah, I agree with you. Let's talk a little bit about some of the non-regulars here. The backing vocals they're credited to the Leppardettes. What do you know about the Leppardettes? I'm imagining that Mutt Lange is one of them.
Yeah, Mutt Lange does a lot of the backing vocals, and also his wife at the time did a lot of the backing vocals. I think beyond that, though, it's essentially just the rest of the band. Well, I don't know any stories from Pyromania, but I don't know if you've discovered the Rock and Tours podcast with Gary Kemp out of Spandau Ballet, and a bass player, Guy Pratt, plays for Pink Floyd Live.
Yep.
They had a podcast with Joe Elliott, and it's quite interesting. They were saying in that Gary Kemp from Spandau Ballet is actually on the backing vocals to Animal off Hysteria.
Okay.
So I think the band have always been quite relaxed in just bringing people in off the streets, and where there's really big vocals, getting lots of people in there. So I would imagine there's lots of stories about the Leppardettes on Pyromania. There could be all sorts of people in there that you know are not actually credited in the main. No, I think it's the band themselves and Mutt Lange.
If you know anything about the Leppardettes, write to me, michaelsrecordcollection@gmail.com, and tell us, and we'll get back to you. We'll revisit this. John Congos did Fairlight CMI programming, and the legendary Thomas Dolby appears on this album. I believe he has a very strange credit on this album.
Yeah, he's credited as Booker T. Boffin on this album. Do you know why he's not given his real name?
I do not know that story.
The reason he wasn't given his real name is that he didn't want to give his real name. So obviously he's very much into electronic music at the time, and you know he doesn't really want to be associated with rock bands, but he's doing keyboards on all sorts of rock bands, to earn a little bit of money on the side and to use his skills. But it's not necessarily something that he wants to be associated with or in his discography. So therefore, when he played keyboards on a few songs on Pyromania, Rock of Ages, Photograph comes to mind. He's on Die Hard the Hunter as well. He asked to actually not be credited. So therefore, that's why he's given a different name on it. He was ashamed, Michael.
and the legendary Tony Kaye from Yes is uncredited with additional keyboards on this album.
Yeah. So this is what I'm saying. This is why I think the Leppardettes may actually have some interesting people in it as well, because obviously around this time they start bringing in people to provide services that the band can't themselves do. There's like a keyboard bass on there, but like on Rock of Ages, but it literally goes bum 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 bum. I mean, me or you could play it. Well, actually, you might be an expert. You might be able to play all sorts of instruments, Michael. I don't know, but
I cannot.
So I think there are some things in there that they've done themselves, but on the whole, once it gets beyond maybe single bass notes, just plodding along to add a bit of colour to the normal bass on Rock of Ages, they've had to get in a few other people.
You did a show, I don't remember if it was the Photograph or the Billy's Got a Gun episode. You did one where you talked about the keyboards and you had some isolated keyboard parts. And until then, I'd never really thought about keyboards in Pyromania, other than there's a couple of places where it's a little obvious. But once you know to look for them and you go looking for them, it's amazing how just these simple, small parts bulk up the sound of this album.
Yeah, and that's how the keyboards are used. I mean, the episode that you're talking about is the Photograph episode, and it's really interesting because if you isolate those keyboard parts, they're ridiculously simple, and they don't sound particularly good, to be honest, on their own. But when you then add it to the rest, those keyboard parts are very much there to add texture, as opposed to be up front a massive, like lead keyboard solo or keyboard part. But it's one
Mhm.
of those things where it's sort of, if you took them away, you would notice, but you don't notice. But with a lot of things like that in like Def Leppard production, as soon as you hear something and something that you might have missed previously, it's impossible to not hear it again. So there's like, you know,
Mhm.
there's the songs off like Hysteria, like God's of War, that's got all strange vocals and things in the background that like sound like they're being like triggered, like loops or programs. And you would just never notice it normally. But then when you hear it and like, you know, it's isolated, when you then put it back on, it's impossible to not hear these things. And the keyboard parts and Pyromania are very much like that.
Yeah, I found it fascinating. Once I knew that they were there, it was just you'd go back and listen to the whole album like that, and you hear it, and you think, Mutt Lange takes some grief from a lot of people, but also if you just hear that, and just for him to know that that would help the sound of the songs so much, just these little subtle things that, as you mentioned, on their own don't sound very good, particularly.
Mm.
Um, it's kind of genius.
Yeah, and I think as well, it's like, so I play the guitar a little bit. And you know, you can buy like guitar tab books where you can learn to, you know, like play the parts. And it's interesting. So you take songs off Hysteria, less so off Pyromania. Pyromania's got a lot more just basic riffs on, and you can play it and it sounds like the song. But with other Def Leppard stuff, you like look at a song and it's like the seven different guitar parts. And they're all playing different little bits. And if you play any one bit on its own, it doesn't really sound like the song. But if you played all of it together, it then sounds like it. So I think Pyromania is the beginning of looking at guitars and instruments in a in an orchestrated way where you build up layers and layers of sounds and textures and whatever to get an overall sound. So that starts in Pyromania, and then it's probably taken to its nth degree in Hysteria, but it's definitely starts in Pyromania, I think.
Yeah, and it's why I think you have this progression from a more raw sound to a more polished sound over time, and why they still sound a little more raw in a live setting because you don't have all of these different parts being played at the same time. So,
Yeah,
um,
definitely.
but again, it's just master craftsmanship on the album, in the album making process. This album reached number 2 on the Billboard 200 album charts in the USA, number 18 in the UK albums chart. It's something called Diamond. I didn't even know this was a thing. I've heard of multi-platinum, but I didn't know there was a thing called Diamond. But apparently, if you have sold more than 10 million copies in the US, you get Diamond certification from the RIAA. 7 times platinum in Canada, only silver in the UK. Come on, Neil.
I know, I know. It's funny what you said about. I probably bought half of them, Michael, to get it to silver. Because I had it on tape, I had it on record, got it on CD. But interestingly, I never knew about the diamond certification either. And the only reason I knew about it is because that Def Leppard were awarded it. I think they've gone double diamond or something. I think there's 20 million copies of Hysteria sold in America alone, which is mad. And if you look
Mhm.
at the other rock bands that are up there, it's they're like iconic bands that I think most music fans who don't like Def Leppard would think that it's a disgrace that Def Leppard could even be mentioned in the same breath as them. You know, like the Beatles, Led Zeppelin, a few other like absolutely like iconic, like, you know, the bands as such. So I think it's always a big surprise when people realize that Def Leppard are in there, but I don't know exactly what it was. Obviously, I'm not American. You might be able to tell, but there was some connection. There's something going on between Def Leppard and the population of the United States of America in the 1980s, where those two those two entities really really get on and like each other. There's some chemistry there, and I couldn't tell you what it is because I don't know.
I don't know either. I mean, I think it was probably a perfect storm of a lot of things happening at the same time. There were, this country has embraced hard rock from its inception, and so it's always been a very popular genre. But then you add in the the MTV factor. I mean, these were good-looking guys making great hard rock sound that had good hooks to them. I think there were a lot of things going for it at the time. It was the girls could like the band and the guys could like the band, and so there was you know, that you're doubling your audience right there.
Yeah, definitely.
So this, as I mentioned, this album only silver in the UK, but it's okay. I'm sure their bank accounts are fine. It starts off with rock, rock till you drop it. I love punctuation in album song or in song titles. Rock exclamation point, rock exclamation point, parenthesis till you drop. Great album opener. It's up tempo. It gets things going very nicely. One of the things that I think this band does very well is sequence their albums. Because the two big, really, I think, cinematic songs on the album are the two album side closers. But Rock Rock Till You Drop's a fantastic opener.
Yeah, Rock Rock Till You Drop as well. That's a really that's perfect for a podcast, because there's an earlier iteration of Rock Rock Till You Drop. So before that song became that song, it was called Medicine Man. So in 1980, they play a live version of the song called Medicine Man, and it's the same main riff as Rock Rock Till You Drop. It's even got the same introduction at the beginning, but it's the same introduction but without keyboards, because that introduction's got keyboards in it. Again, you don't massively hear them, and it's really, really interesting if you listen to Medicine Man to Rock Rock Till You Drop, because Medicine Man's got the hook in the melody is nowhere near as good, and the lyrics just, I'm not saying Rock Rock Till You Drop has got, you know, it's not Shakespeare by any means, but it's, you know, there's a phonetic sound in there that's easy. It is an easy hook. It's like rock, rock till you drop. So there's like an assonance in the O sound and what have you. So it's just easy and accessible to get into, and it's quite a good exercise in seeing that when they got with Mutt Lange in terms of the way they were pushed to rewrite songs and try and deliver, you know, catchier hooks and be more accessible. And listening to Medicine Man, and no one's ever heard that, you can go onto Spotify or iTunes or whatever. There's an album called Live in Oxford 1980, and Medicine Man's on that. You can listen to that and compare it to Rock Rock Till You Drop, but there's no comparison. The version that ends up on Pyromania is a much better version. And it's, well, I say it's the perfect opener. You could argue that Stage Fright would be the perfect opener for that album, but you know, it's a perfectly fine opener if you don't want to have Stage Fright. Though Stage Fright has always seemed to me, you know, with the way it begins, we're like, welcome to my show. That always seems to have been like an obvious album opener, but I don't know, maybe they just thought it was a little bit too heavy or too fast. I'm not too sure.
Well, I think the message you want is right off the bat is rock, rock till you drop. It's a very American type of thing. It's like, yeah, we're going to party, we're going to have a good time. And you know, it gets you right into it. Whereas Stage Fright, that's kind of a negative thing.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
Stage Fright, I don't know about that. I mean, but you're right. The welcome to my show part is certainly would lend itself to opening the album. This was an edited version of this was released as a single in Mexico. I didn't know that. And I hadn't seen, until I started researching for this show, I hadn't seen the video for it. And I don't know when it was recorded in terms of in proximity to other videos, but Joe's wearing the same shirt as he's wearing in the Foolin' video. Yeah,
I think that, because I don't know if there's an official video for Rock Rock Till You Drop, with it only being released in Mexico. And by the way, I never knew that, so you've taught me something. Thank you very much, Michael. That's good. But there was a Def Leppard like VHS cassette released in 1988 called Historia, and that is all of the videos from the beginning up to the Hysteria album, and it also includes a couple of television performances. And one of the television performances is Rock Rock Till You Drop. I think it's in Japan or somewhere like that. It might be that video that you've seen, but I don't know if there's an actual proper video for it. It might just be that it's that one from Japan.
Yeah, in this one, it is, again, he's wearing the same shirt. It looks like they're playing in a warehouse.
Yeah, we're talking about the same one. Yeah, it's exactly the same one we're talking about. I think it's a television show in Japan.
Yeah. but obviously not the same set. Even though he wore the same shirt, not the same set is a much more grand setting for the Foolin' video with the skulls and all the other things that they got going on there. But it was an interesting one anyway. And I don't understand
inverted commas. Interesting. I agree.
I don't understand what it is with YouTube. We can shoot William Shatner into space, but we can't make a YouTube video and audio sync up properly.
I know. It's funny, those Pyromania videos and those Foolin' ones, and maybe this is why it was big in America, particularly with ladies, is that Joe Elliott seems to be tied to something on pretty much every single one of those those videos.
So Joe, we're gonna tie you up again. So the second song is the big one. Still probably one of my, if you had a desert island singles for rock singles, I would put Photograph on this. This was the subject of Def Lep Pod episode number 5. First single off the album came out February 3rd. Went to number 1 on the mainstream rock chart here in the U.S. Number 12 on the Billboard Hot 100, which is, the big hit chart. Again, Neil, I gotta question the UK. Number 66 on the UK single chart. What?
For whatever reason, they weren't resonating at the time. I mean, they were in 1980. They On Through the Night sells quite well, and they play a theatre tour of Britain, playing about 2,500 people, and that goes really well, and they're doing well. They then go to the States on tour, and then for whatever reason, there's a music magazine called Sounds, which turns against them. It's a very British thing to do this, by the way. I could say that I'm British, and it turns against them, and they release like an article or a feature saying about, has the Leppard changed its spots, and they start getting accused of selling out. Having a single called Hello America probably doesn't help them, and for whatever reason, the people who do like, or some of the people who do like them at that time, turn very much sort of turn against them, and they played at Reading Festival in the August after they come back from the States, and they don't go down very well, and then from that point onwards they just lose all momentum in the UK. They play a theatre tour for the High and Dry album, playing all exactly the same places they played on the On Through the Night album, where they were all packed and most of them were sold out. And they're playing to less than half full theatres. And I don't know if there's a bit of a chicken and egg situation here, or I don't know if it's chicken and egg or catch-22, but where, because they're not doing well in Britain and they're doing better in America, and they're playing all of these places in Britain, but no one's coming. I would imagine that then comes a point where you put your efforts into where people are welcoming you, and then that is exacerbated. So, yeah. Interestingly, Def Leppard they talk about songs that they have to play live. They could get away with not playing Photograph live in Britain. They couldn't get away with not playing Pour Some Sugar on Me or Hysteria or Love Bites or Let's Get Rocked even, because Adrenalize did well in Britain. But other than actual Def Leppard fans, your casual fans who might come to an arena show to see Def Leppard because they've heard, Hysteria, essentially, those British people won't know Photograph, which is mad if you're American, because that's I mean, it'd be that and Pour Some Sugar on Me are the two, I would imagine, undroppable songs in the States. So I can't legislate for the insanity of the British public in the 1980s for not getting into Def Leppard. They were clearly very wrong, and I'm very angry at all of them, Michael. Terrible.
Def Lep Pod does not adhere to the British people's overall feelings on this album. Photograph is definitely an entry point for the U.S., and it had very great guitar riffs, a fantastic solo, and just the soaring vocals that Joe has on this. It's to this day, if I can every once in a while singing along, I'll hit that note with him and I'll just be like, yes.
And that's one where if you hear the isolated vocal for Photograph, it's amazing. It's genuinely. And what's really good about it is Joe Elliott's a really good singer, but he's not like a Steve Perry or someone like these you get some people who can just sing anything. You know, they just sing absolutely anything. What's really good about the photograph, and especially when you hear it as isolated vocal, there's a real charm and there's something really, really enticing when you can hear someone right at the very edge of what they can do. And almost even if like they don't quite hit it, there's something good in that as well. And I think photographs like that, he's right at the edge of what he can do there. And it just gives it that, even though it's a very polished sort of pop metal song, there is that sort of underlying rawness, I think, where that comes from. And if you hear his isolated vocals, it sounds like his throat's absolutely battered. It's really good.
My throat hurts just listening to trying to hit that note. So, but yeah, it's got the strangest video though. I mean, there's just so many weird little things in there. Like there's these images of someone like dropping all this jewelry into a hand that doesn't quite tie into the rest of the video. At the end of it, Marilyn goes from alive to being choked to death to back to being alive and like hitting the camera with her shoe to being dead again at the end. It's very odd. I'd love to talk to the director and find out what was going on there.
Well, that was David Mallet, and David Mallet, if you look at all his videos through the 1980s, he did lots of very, very strange videos. And I think, like a lot of these music directors, they come with an idea that, you know, that they want to put in a music video, and it's sort of irrelevant whether the song actually goes with it or not.
Yeah, and there was a lot of cocaine running around in the 80s.
Yeah.
So who knows where that came from, but. We go back for track 3. We go into Stage Fright, the song that you mentioned, the live sounding intro. Do you know the background of that? The live sort of that I don't know if it's simulated or how they did that.
I think it's simulated, and I could only imagine that the reason it's in there is because of, you know, the title of the song. But I don't think it's from an actual recording. But it's a good question. I've not thought about it. If it's not from a live recording, then how is it simulated? You know what? Maybe that's my homework, Michael. I'll have a little look into that and see if I can find out.
There's a future episode for you right there, and no charge.
Yeah.
This is the only song that Steve Clark doesn't have a writing credit for. He was on credited for all the other songs, and I think Mutt was credited for every song, and maybe Joe.
Yeah, and that's quite surprising as well, because especially when you listen to the riff in Stage Fright, you would imagine if someone was going to say who wrote that riff, then you would think it would be, it would be Steve Clark, because obviously he came up with something like Wasted on the first album. But yeah, so I mean, what Def Leppard often say about Steve Clark is he would very rarely come with like a whole song or maybe even like a whole verse or whatever. But what he'd do is he was the best for coming to the band with like really cool parts and really cool riffs. Gods of War being another one off the Stereo album. And then what they do is they would take them as the focal points to build songs around them or make sure that they included them. So maybe Stage Fright was just one where he didn't contribute a cool part because they already had one.
Yeah. One of the, I think, more underrated songs on the album. I think it's something that I don't know how often they've done that one live, but that one, I don't think they played it when I saw them, and I've only seen them once, but that's one that I would like to see live.
Stage Fright.
Yeah.
Well, on the Hysteria tour, they opened with that every night, and I think they did for a little bit of the Adrenalize tour. That was the first time I saw them in 1992, and I'm sure they might have started with Stage Fright. But they've got a live video called "In the Round in Your Face." And that's brilliant because it starts with Stage Fright, and they play the first up until about halfway through the first verse behind like a curtain, and then it drops as it kicks into the chorus, and it's amazing. So it's really good. So yeah, I'd love to see them do that again, and I'd love to see them open with that song.
So they weren't trolling the British Isles by opening with "Hello America."
No. Well, but it's interesting actually because when you hear about that song, it's all it is. It's about escapism. You got to remember that Joe Elliott was like working in the basement of a factory in Sheffield, which is an industrial town in the UK, and a lot of those places that he refers to, if he didn't even know where they were, he like literally was just looking through an atlas or a map and going, okay, well that word rhymes with that word, so that's what I'll put in it. They've got another song which is it's the very first song on the very first EP, which is called Riding to the Sun. And it's essentially exactly the same sentiment. It's just a song of escapism, of wanting to just ride into the sun. And another version of wanting to ride into the sun, if you're in a basement in a factory in Sheffield where it just rains for 364 days a year, is, you know, you're looking at like the palm trees and whatever, like California in the States. And that's just a different version of riding to the sun. It probably could have easily have been riding to, I don't know, Thailand or somewhere else where it's sunny, to be honest, if they knew about Thailand.
How hard is it to find that EP now in the UK?
It's really difficult to find the original pressing of it. So there's an original pressing with a red label. There was only 1,000 of them. And that's the one where Joe Elliott and his mum actually sat around a table pasting together the actual the sleeve itself, and it had like lyrics in it and what have you. So that's really, really difficult to get. If you look on Discogs, for example, you know, you're normally looking at around £1,000 to get probably even like a not very good version of that. Like, I don't even know if it'd be like VG or VG plus. But then there's another one which they then released when they got signed. That wasn't independent. It's got a yellow label, and it's the label. It's BSB 001. If you get that one, you can pick that up for about £10, and they're quite easy to get. So that's not the very, very first one that was released, but is when they got signed by their managers and by the record label, which was on the back of the independent red label release. The yellow label release is quite easy to get, and it's worth getting as well, because it's still, it's you know, when you listen to an album and all you can hear is two guitars, one bass, drums, vocals, and you can hear every single thing, and it essentially just sounds alive. And it's the bass on that single. There's a song called Overture, which is on the second side. The bass on that sounds absolutely brilliant. It sounds like Rick Savage is in the room with you. So yeah, you can pick that up for about £10, which is about $15. I would recommend that to your listeners.
Okay, I'll have to get that. I now that you mentioned that story, I think I recall you talking to someone on your podcast, and they had picked up a good copy of it, and they had like, they were scared they weren't going to be able to pick it up. They maxed out their credit card or something, but they ended up getting a copy of the red label. Yeah. But Too Late for Love. This was the fourth single from the album. A bit of a what we call a power ballad. Went to number 9 on the mainstream rock chart here in the US, number 86 on the UK singles chart. This is a really, it's got a really cool guitar solo and a very simple. It's kind of a simple solo, but it's very cool. I just like the way that they do some of these more subtle guitar parts that aren't quite as theatric, where it's almost like they bring the music down and just in a few notes say a lot with just a simple little riff.
Yeah, that is actually quite a simple song. I know it's simple because I can actually play it all the way through, and I'm really not very good at all. And there's lots of like open strings in it, and it's nice and slow. So it's like it's quite an atmospheric song. And that's one they still play to this day. They might not, if they're just doing one of their summer tours of the States, which is what they tended to do pretty much since around 2006, they might not play it. But when they do things a little bit different, like maybe a Vegas residency or maybe like an album tour, or whether they'll throw it in. And when they play something like Too Late for Love now, because it's not a song that they played, you know, like say like a Pour Some Sugar on Me or something at every single gig for the last 20 years, when that comes, that's a real high point when he plays something like Too Late for Love. It's an excellent song.
Yeah, that little ding 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 ding, that is just very cool, and it's not something that you would think that would, it's a little bit of a surprise every time they do it. I just say coming up with that was interesting, because it's simple, and it's just, it's not like theatrical at all. It's not complex. It just fits the song perfectly.
Yeah. It's interesting that you say like a ballad, because you think it is a ballad as well, but I think it's a little bit different. It seems a little bit moodier than like it's like an out and out love song. There's something a little bit more darker about it, maybe, you know, like in
That's
the
because
lyrics
it's
and
too
what have
late.
you.
It's too late for love, Neil. It's
Yeah,
they're
it's
not
not.
in. Love is over. It's too late for that.
Yeah, it's not. Love has arrived at my door 10 minutes
Yeah,
early. It's yeah, like you said, it's too late.
yeah. It's not. Oh, you're the love of my life. It's like too late. But yeah, it's a great song. And then that goes right into the very cinematic Die Hard, The Hunter, a song about what war does to a person and how those mental scars are sort of carried forward. And this just seems like, and I didn't really have a lot of time to get into this, and I was having trouble finding specifics on this, but you've probably had a little bit more of a dive into Die Hard, The Hunter than I have, and I wondered, was this Joe just seeing a movie and saying, I want to do, like, I just watched The Deer Hunter, I want to write a song about this, or was there something a little bit more personal in this for him?
No, it's exactly what you just said. In terms of it was inspired by Deer Hunter, and Billy's Got a Gun was inspired by Death Wish. So essentially, what happens in the Pyromania album is that Joe decides he wants to start writing a different type of song, maybe one with a little bit more gravitas or a bit more of a narrative or a bit more of a story. But you got to remember at this point, they're still relatively young. They're in like the early 20s.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think there's maybe a massive amount of dark life experience to sort of pull on at that point. So like probably what like most young men do, you like going to see the movies and then they take a part of, you know, a narrative of a movie and they very much use that to influence a couple of songs. So yeah, Die Hard, The Hunter is very much just lifted from Deer Hunter.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But again, it's just such a big sounding song, like a soundtrack song. You can imagine watching a movie and hearing that in the theater in the Dolby 360. And actually, they should put that out in the Dolby 360 so we can hear it that way.
Yeah,
But
yeah, it's got helicopters at the start. It's very Apocalypse Now at the start with like that, you know, the helicopters and
yeah,
what have you. And it's got that slow start that builds up the atmosphere, and then obviously it kicks in with that riff. Do you know what that riff is taken from? I'm not too sure if you'll know this reference because I'm going to refer to a British musician from the '60s who I don't think he made it outside of Britain. Have you ever heard of a man called Cliff Richard?
I do know Cliff Richard. Yes, we have very little knowledge of Cliff on this side of the ocean, but he had I think his biggest hit here might have been "We Don't Talk Anymore."
Yeah. So Cliff Richard is essentially Britain's far inferior version of Elvis. So like obviously Elvis comes out, you know, as like a musical icon, changes the shape of music and what have you. So Britain find like a very light, spelt Lite version of Elvis, and it happens to be Cliff Richard. He's got like no sex appeal whatsoever. He's like the opposite end, but he tries to play some sort of like rock and roll. But anyway, apologies for anyone who loves Cliff Richard. He used to get Christmas #1 all of the time in Britain in the 80s. So I've got a little bit of a not a soft spot, whatever the opposite of a soft spot is, but an annoying spot. But anyway, he had a song called "Devil Woman," and the melody to "Devil Woman" goes, "She's just a devil woman." Do, 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 do.
Yeah.
If you listen to the riff of Die Hard the Hunter, they ripped it off the melody for Devil Woman because the riff goes do 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 do, and that's where they lifted it from or took the idea from. Is a Cliff Richard song.
Did Cliff get a credit, or at least a credit after the fact?
No, because I think this definitely comes under the category of
Too
being
simple.
being influenced by other music as opposed to stealing it.
Yes, I remember Devil Woman. Yes, with evil in her eye. Yeah, it was. Yeah. And I think I take that back about Cliff. I think maybe his biggest hit here was his duet with Olivia Newton-John for the Xanadu soundtrack with "Suddenly."
Oh, I don't think I know that one.
Very big here. I don't know about there, but it sounds like every Christmas you guys get a Cliff Richard song and a Doctor Who special.
Yeah, we did. There was a song called "Mistletoe and Wine." they always had a strong Christian element to them, which is fine and everything, you know what I mean? But it was all like a little bit strange. You'd rather have like, you know, Slade. Because in the 70s, British number ones at Christmas were all like these like really like colourful, loud, glam British pop rock songs. And then in the 80s, it starts getting a little bit more strange.
Side 2 kicks off with Foolin'. This was the third single off the album, September 1983. It came out as a single and went to number 9 on the mainstream rock chart here, number 28 on the Billboard Hot 100. And the note I have here is a weird video with a captive Joe Elliott escaping from captivity when his shackles inexplicably sort of explode, and then he walks down these sort of like drapery curtain black hallway with explosions going off behind him. It is surreal. And then there's a woman that I don't know if it's his girlfriend he's escaping from. She's got a crystal ball. Just an insane video, but a great song. And again, the Leps do one thing very well, and that's to write very catchy guitar riffs, and they do great backing vocals with just about everything they do.
Yeah, and that's a song that's still a staple of the live set to this day. That's one that I'm sure they played in like 95% of the gigs. Funnily enough, it's a song I like, and I probably like it a lot more than a lot of like maybe like casual Def Leppard fans. But it's one to me where, as I said, it's a staple of the live show. They could happily drop it for me. It's a song that I like, but it's not a song that I like most of the songs on Pyromania much more. I couldn't tell you specific reasons. Sometimes a song just resonates with you, or it doesn't. And I do like it. And I like the bit. There's a bit in the middle that goes, oh. I'm not getting the right tune there, but there's like an oh bit that I quite like. But yeah, it's a good song. But for me, it's definitely not one of my favorites off Pyromania. And it's a song I'd like to see them drop from the set list. That might sound like blasphemy, just to give another song. Like I'd love to, you know what? I would love them to drop "Foolin'" and play "Coming Under Fire" instead. Yeah, if they were going to replace it with a Pyromania song, which I believe they've never played live.
Yeah, I believe I know the part you're talking about. They're sort of going whoa, whoa, and it kind of layers on top of each other a little bit. It's a pretty cool song. I wonder how they came up with the affectation of the sort of stutter, because you don't. I'm sure that's not something you wrote in the lyrics. Fool, and it just kind of came up somewhere. I don't know if that's something Mutt introduced or what.
I don't know, but I would imagine most things like that in Def Leppard songs, there's often a story behind them, which is great when you're doing a Def Leppard podcast. And it wouldn't surprise me because like the band were big fans of bands like The Who and whatever. So obviously you've got My Generation, which is probably the most famous song for having the stutter in it. So it wouldn't surprise me if they took the idea from something like My Generation by The Who.
Yeah, it could be. Rock of Ages comes next. This was the second single. Came out in May of 1983. It went to number 1 on the mainstream rock chart here, number 16 on the Billboard Hot 100. And of course, it's got the iconic gibberish of Gunter, Gleben, Glauten, Globen, which was then used by The Offspring in 1998 for Pretty Fly for a White Guy. Sounds like the lads were having some fun with some backward masking on this during the guitar solo, with some interesting things to say about the Russians. What do you know about that story?
I don't know anything about the backward masking about the Russians. I'll have to listen to it. I don't know anything about that.
This was straight, and it might be crap because this was straight out of Wikipedia, but it was something like you can clearly hear them saying something about Brezhnev and something else about Russia. But it's when I listened to the song immediately after reading that, they do say something. You can tell there's something going on there that you can't listen to forward to backward properly. But if you play it backward, supposedly they're having a little fun at the Russians' expense.
All right, that's interesting. I think with that type of thing, often there's all like tests that you can do, isn't it? Like where if you're told that it's saying something, your brain makes you hear it. And I don't know if that's happening. There's a funny one on there's an Iron Maiden song. I can't remember, but at the end, you play something backwards. And then when you actually play it the right way round, it's Nico McBrain, the drummer, just shouting, "What go?" said the king. And that's all it is.
Yeah.
I don't know the opening, the Gunter Gleben Glauben Globen bit. There was attempts to give that some meaning, and I think someone tried to say it was like something like, running through the forest backwards or whatever. But they were able to put that to bed. That it was a Mort would just to introduce the song rather than going 1, 2, 3, 4. He would just say daft things, and I think there's probably recordings and say lots of different things and just making up gibberish. But that one stuck, and he kept it at the start of the song.
Yeah, it sounds German, but it's not, and and apparently the guys in Def Leppard just liked that one better than some of the other ones that he came up with, and they decided to keep it. So that's pretty cool. And then when the Offspring came out with it in the late '90s. And I heard that, and I was like, "What? Wait, that's not the right thing. That's not the right music to follow that."
But the weird thing is when you speak to younger people, you heard the Offspring version, and then if they happen to hear the Rock of Ages, they go, "Oh, that's the Offspring start." It's like, no, you've got that all wrong. As a 43-year-old man, I need to put you right on this one. Sorry.
Yeah,
exactly.
Again, this was Joe walking with a giant sword in the video. There's some strange stuff going on, but again, mostly Def Leppard's videos are performance with a couple of weird kind of side things for Joe to do.
Yeah, but you know what I like? See, most of these videos we talked about so far, we've gone, that's a bit silly, that's a bit daft, and that's totally the correct interpretation. However, there is a bit in this that I do really like. He's got the sword, and he puts the sword down on a light box, and then all of a sudden it flashes and it turns into the guitar, and then it cuts to Phil Collins playing the guitar solo. I'll be honest with you, I do really like that part of the video.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. I do like that. But some of the stuff you put a sword down on a light box, it becomes a guitar. If you think about it for more than 2 seconds, you start to go, what? But I think there's a lot of that in Def Leppard's past. I would love to do a deep dive on the On Through the Night album cover, because none of that album cover makes sense. It's a truck in space with a giant guitar on the back, and I don't know how a truck is traveling through space.
Well, interestingly, through the Def Leppard community, I've met a gentleman called Dan Horner, and he's a graphic designer, and he's a massive Def Leppard fan as well. And we're going to have an episode with him in the future because he's dying to talk about all of the album covers and Def Leppard art, and he's got real good knowledge about all of that. So we're going to have him on a future episode. So if you listening to that one or just a part of it On Through the Night, Dan might be able to tell you what the background behind that is.
Oh, that'd be great. So, but Rock of Ages was giant here. We thought that it was giant until Hysteria came out, and we saw how giant that Def Leppard could really be, because I was looking at Spotify today, and I think Photograph has something like 25 million listens or streams, whatever they want to call it. And then you go and you look at Pour Some Sugar on Me, it's got 4 times that many.
Yeah, there's a big gap between, I know you mean on Spotify and the popular section. There's a big gap between Pour Some Sugar on Me and then whatever the second thing is. I think the second one might be Hysteria, but I think Pour Some Sugar on Me might be like twice as many as the second. I think it's got something like ridiculous, like it's like 3 figures of a million as opposed to double figures of a million, which I think is like the rest of them.
I think there are 4 songs on Hysteria that far surpass anything on probably anything else that they've done. But
Def Leppard were quite late to get onto all of the streaming services because they were having a wrangle with the record company. So all of the Def Leppard stuff didn't actually come on to the streaming services until early 2018. It's only been on there for a few years.
Yeah. Well, it's doing well. And it's actually good for me because when I was working in sports, I lost track of Def Leppard for years. And so I'm not as familiar with a lot of their later output that sort of was released quietly and I didn't have time to go and and discover it. So I'm discovering it now. So that's kind of fun. Coming Under Fire, and I've got this written down. You've already mentioned it. I've got it written down as most underrated song on the album.
Yeah, but by a mile. It's one of those songs where in if you go on Def Leppard forums or whatever, most like diehard Def Leppard fans, that will often top their most underrated Def Leppard song. You Got Me Running on High and Dry is often another one, but yeah, Coming Under Fire is a brilliant one. And I don't know if I've never heard of him before, so apologies if he's really big in the States. I think he's a country singer, Matt Nathanson. Well, he released like a little EP called Pyromania, and it's got covers of, there's 5 or 6 like acoustic covers of him doing different Def Leppard songs. And he's obviously a big Def Leppard fan because he does like Stage Fright and Coming Under Fire. He does ones that, you know, you wouldn't think to do. Yeah. And his version of Coming Under Fire is absolutely brilliant as well. And it's one of those where you hear a song stripped down and done in a simple way, the quality of the songwriting really shines through, because you could take out all of the effects and the production and you're just left with the pure song, and it's still absolutely brilliant. So that's something worth listening to.
Yeah, great melody, great, again, vocals, and some of those vocals sort of layered a little bit on top of each other. And this one actually it wasn't a single, but it charted number 24 on the mainstream rock chart here. Action Not Words follows. That one went to number 42 on the mainstream rock chart. Again, this just kind of Action Not Words is another song that's just kind of a rockin' song, and it's the sequencing of the album makes it so that even though it's maybe not one of the strongest songs on this side, I think it just works perfectly between Coming Under Fire and Billy's Got a Gun. And again, exclamation point, action, exclamation point, not words.
Yeah, I think that's considered by a lot of people to be like the weakest track on the album. It's Pyromania's version of something like Don't Shoot Shotgun or Run Riot or Excitable off Hysteria, where there's such high level, popular, successful songs that, you know, no album's gonna have like 10 like perfect songs on it. I've actually got a special place in my heart for Action Not Words, because you got to remember, this is me when I was like 10 or 11 getting into it, and it was, for some reason, there was something about the simplicity of those lyrics where it was the first song that I knew the lyrics from beginning to end. I'm not going to sing them now for you, Michael, as you heard earlier on. I can't hold a tune at all, but there's still Def Leppard songs to this day that I've been listening to for 30 years. I still don't really know the words. I just make sounds. Yeah. But action not words. As a 10 or 11-year-old, I knew every single word of that. So it's got a special place in my heart because of that.
Another movie tie-in song for them. A lot of the lyrics. And then we close the album with Billy's Got a Gun. And this was the subject of Def Lep Pod episode 11. It went to number 33 on the U.S. mainstream rock chart, another big cinematic track. And again, they knew how to end an album side, Def Leppard, on this, and a big sound. As you mentioned already, you know, Billy's Got a Gun kind of came from Death Wish, and you know, it's very, not just cinema, but it's very American cinema.
Yeah. It definitely evokes that. I might be wrong here, and correct me if I am, but so in the mid to late 70s, there seemed to be a lot of American films that depicted New York in less than a flattering light. Should we say like that real sort of like gritty, urban, dangerous sort of city? And I think this song tries to evoke that sort of mood and that sort of feel. And I like this song because it's actually got a narrative to it. You can read the lyrics and it reads as a story. There's a few little bits where, you know, it deviates from being a story. And there's a nice ambiguous ending where, like, you know, the gun goes off. Who's being shot? You know, has Billy shot someone? Has he been shot himself? Has he shot his gun but not shot someone? So there's a nice cliffhanger ending to the song. And it's got really, really good solo in as well. There's 2 solos in the song, and the outro solo in particular is just excellent.
Yeah, can't you feel it in the air, or can you feel it in the air? That part I love the way that they sing that, and
Yeah.
it also reminded me of maybe Joe was listening to some Jimi Hendrix. It's got that sort of tie into Hey Joe,
Yeah,
um,
yeah.
and you know where you going with that gun in your hand kind of thing, and because he
Yeah.
says Billy, hey, why you got that gun?
Yeah.
Um, so there might be a tie in there, but just a solid album closer, and it just brings the curtain down. Another movie reference there, or at least a cinema reference on 10 very, very strong songs and one of the seminal albums of the 80s.
Yeah. And I mean, I don't know. Have you ever listened past the end of Billy's Got a Gun where it's got like a strange
I was going to
sort
bring
of
that up next. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So there's a strange thing at the end. I think some people would argue that that's not a good way to and to end an
Yeah.
album. I know people really hate that bit, and sort of don't see the point in it. But it's going to your point. Yeah, a seminal album, definitely, certainly in the States, and even for UK Def Leppard fans, that would be a high watermark, definitely for Def Leppard. Me personally, it's my second favorite Def Leppard album, and interestingly, if you compare it to, say, Hysteria, which is the obvious successful album, I think that where you could argue it might not hit the heights of Hysteria, depending on taste, as often, what I would say is that outside of the hits, the lesser songs on Pyromania, for want of a better expression, are of a better quality than the lesser songs on Hysteria. So I think there is an argument where Hysteria might have more big hitters across the album in terms of consistency. I think Pyromania is probably actually a more consistent album in terms of quality.
I would agree with that. That's kind of the way I feel about it. I think even as you mentioned, the so-called lesser songs, I think hold up very well for me. And being a rock and, being a rock guy, something like Action Not Words works really well for me.
Mm.
You mentioned Don't Shoot Shotgun earlier, and that to me that's one of my actual favorite songs off of the Hysteria album. So I liked some of those. I'll be honest with you. I know everybody loves Pour Some Sugar on Me. I could go the rest of my life without hearing that song again. It's a good enough song, but I think it just got played so often that I'm just burnt out on it a bit, and also I don't really want to think about pouring sugar on Joe Elliott.
Well, funnily enough, one thing I never knew, and again, this might sound quite shocking to you, is to someone who's got a Def Leppard podcast, you should know this, but it wasn't really made apparent to me, is that in America, you hear Pour Some Sugar on Me in non-musical settings as well. So it's often played, in big sports arenas and, and
Yeah.
what have you. So it's not even just a case of, I mean, you can take any song and it no matter how much you love it, but if you hear it too much, after a while it can breed a certain amount of contempt. And from my understanding in the States is it's not even just like it's on the radio all of the time. It's like, if you go to the NFL or you go to the basketball or whatever it is, it's just played it's played everywhere. You go in an elevator, it's played. You're in the, you're in Walmart, it's being played. Where I don't think it's you probably only really hear it on there's a couple of rock stations in the UK now that never used to be. So you might hear it now and again, like maybe like once every few weeks, or if you listened to the album. So I think you were definitely bombarded with it a lot more than we were.
Yeah, that's probably fair to say. It's probably fair to say. Anything you want to add to wrap up our discussion of Pyromania? I think we've covered all the songs, but you've had much deeper dives into Def Leppard than I have. So, anything that sticks out about the making of it, or any of the stories that you've heard?
I think the main interesting things are probably a couple of things that I've already said, in terms of I think it benefits from the influence of Phil Collin and Pete Willis, which you don't get in any other album. So therefore, you get a really unique set of influences and set of sounds merging in it, and I think that makes it quite unique. And what I would say as well, I think this is the album, in my opinion, up of the first four, where they get the balance perfect between still being an out and out rock band and being able to attract, you know, rock fans, start to appeal to a pop audience as well. I know for a lot of people, High and Dry is like, after High and Dry, they're not interested in it, and even Pyromania is a little bit too poppy. But even though Hysteria is an album, probably for nostalgic reasons, because it's the album that got me into them, that I would still put as my favorite album, I actually think Pyromania is the one where they get the balance just right. So yeah, less stories there for you, Michael, and probably just a couple of like opinions on why Pyromania stands out in their catalog.
Yeah. All right, fair enough. Neil, why don't we remind folks where they can find you on the internet?
So they can find me on Twitter at Def Lep Pod. They can find me on Facebook at Def Lep Pod Neil, where I'm not pretending to be Def Leppard. And they can also find me on any podcast app if you just put in Def Lep Pod. There's no other Def Leppard podcasts out there that are regularly publishing episodes, so I should be the top of the list, not because I'm better than anyone else, it's just because I'm the only one out there.
There you go. Well, maybe that's what makes you better than anyone else, is you're actually doing one.
I like that take, thank you.
Yeah. It's a very entertaining show, Neil. I like it a lot. I'm a Def Leppard fan. I wouldn't say that I'm one of these super fans. I'm not like a forum guy, but I do enjoy the band, and I do enjoy, you know, anything that really takes a deep dive into music that I like. So I think you do a great job with that, and I appreciate your time today. I appreciate your show. I hope a lot of people will go and listen to it. Your audience is probably much bigger than mine at this point. So, but if I could even just turn one or two new people your way, then my job here has been a success.
Thank you very much, Michael. Thank you very much for inviting me on. Very much appreciated.